Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome or welcome back, again, as the case might be. My name is Dalibor Petrovic. I am the founder of the Summit Leadership Alliance and the host to these TechTonic Conversations, a series of live webcasts that we've been putting on to bring to our Canadian audiences the latest and greatest conversations on all things leadership development, tech leadership, enterprise technology. Today, I have a very, very special guest, a friend and a colleague, Jennifer Gervais-Keen. Jennifer is the award-winning Master Executive Coach, a facilitator, public speaker, and a PhD student on a very cool topic, the topic of social change through workplace learning. And Jennifer, we've been collaborating for many years. I know that you bring wealth of wisdom and experience. And why I really wanted to have you join me and have a conversation here is because you're bringing something very new to the surface. The conversation of leadership that is now expanded to include this newish concept of followership. And when I heard you say this for the first time, maybe a couple of years ago now, I was personally, wow, this is the missing piece. So I want to first and foremost thank you very much for finding the time to join me on this session. Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, this is a live conversation, and while we will record it and post it on TechTonic's YouTube channel, if you're following me now on this fine Tuesday, 28th of January, 2025, feel free to submit any questions you might have using the Q&A function, and we will do our best to address as many questions as we can. So Jennifer, with that, over to you.
Thank you, Dalibor. It is fantastic to be back and to see you and to start off January talking about one of my favorite things. So I think followership, so first of all, it actually has been around for a long time. We just have kind of ignored it. I don't think people like the name.
Yes.
I think people get a real thing in their head about, following like sheep or, I'm an independent person or whatever. And that's not what it's about. I also think a lot of organizations use followership from the leadership side of things, if that makes sense. So they use followership as a word and a trait that leaders have to create followers. So again, it's on the leadership behavior, right?
That's actually, this is, I think, super important. I want to emphasize this, that when we talk about followership now, what we're going to have discussion today now is not that version of followership where leaders need to create followers.
No, it's
right?
not
This
that
is
at
very
all.
important.
No.
This is about leaders showing up as followers, right?
Well, it's about leaders showing up as followers, and it's about understanding that organizations cannot be run on leadership alone, I think is right, is where we're going here. So the best definition, I like to start with definitions that I have found is actually by a colleague of mine, Langley Sharp, who's based in the UK. And he defines it as the act of an individual or individuals willing to accept the influence of others to achieve a shared outcome. And I think that there's powerful words there, right? Shared outcome, willingly accepting the influence of others. And when I think of senior leadership, which is the space that I primarily work in, and I look at collaborative leadership between, executives, different departments and organizations, different, sections, whatever, we can't actually get to that shared goal, that shared outcome without followership. Because if you have 6 leaders in a room and no one is following, then you've got 6 egos, 6 individuals who are protecting their territory of their department, 6 individuals who are thinking maybe about their team, but it's a very vertical way of thinking. And we know that in executive mindset, has to be horizontal, right? So you can't get there without followership. You have to be able to, pass the baton and say, you know what, you're going to lead this part, but I'm going to follow you because you're the expert in this. Or, this is something you're clearly interested in. Why doesn't all your energy, go into, influencing us to get to that outcome? So I think we do it. I think we are aware that we do it, maybe, but we don't have a frame of reference and we don't have like a framework to base that around. And
Yeah.
so followership has actually been around since like the 1950s and before in the academic world.
Mm.
So there's been a ton of research. Probably the first big one, 1992, was Robert E. Kelly with the power of followership. Then Barbara Kellerman came in and started talking about how followers are actually active, not passive, and they have a great deal of influence on leadership. Ira Shalev came along with the courageous follower. So it's been around for a while. I think that organizations are reluctant for a couple of reasons. Like I said, I don't think they like the word. I don't think they like
Yeah.
the language. I
Yeah.
also think that we got, from the 1980s up, if you look at the history of labor, we really got into the leader is everything kind of thing, right? We only teach leadership in MBA courses, and everything is about becoming a leader as you go through your career. And for a lot of organizations, the only way of moving up the ladder is to get into leadership, which we know that that doesn't work. Just because you're really great at your job and have been there for a long time does not make you a leader. So we have to start, and some of my tech organizations are doing this, we have to start having two separate paths for that piece. But we can talk about that topic in another webcast. But it's really, so basically how I started in followership is I went down a bit of a rabbit hole during the pandemic, as many of us did. And because I was watching my leaders fall apart on my Zoom screen week after week after week. Like, they're human. They were carrying so much. All the organizations that I worked with were, focused on, how do we make sure our employees are okay? How do we make sure, that our leaders are working with our teams and making sure people are connected and still getting the work done? And of course, we started having a big conversation around mental health. But none of the organizations were doing anything for the leaders. It was all about the teams, right? So I started thinking there's got to be something else. There's got to be a different way of looking at leadership, or maybe there's a theory that I've missed over the years, or maybe there's something new. And so I sort of went down a variety of different research paths and kind of fell on this followership thing. And as soon as I did, to your point, all the pieces
Fell
just
into place.
clicked into place. It was like, this is the missing piece, is we tend to hold our leaders responsible for everything in an organization. And what we know is, yes, they need to role model the behaviors that we're looking for. They need to inspire and lead and have visions and all that great stuff. Um, but at the end of the day, an organizational culture is created by the behavior of every single individual in that culture. That's not something that leaders own. And so, but we've gone there, right? The spectrum has sort of swung, especially post-pandemic, over to a place where leaders are literally responsible for everything. And that's not how organizations work. 70% of the work done in organizations is by people who are not in formal leadership roles. So if these individuals are not engaged and not actively productive and not taking responsibility for their own development and behavior, and just, how am I engaging with my work, my leader, my workforce? How am I contributing? How am I ensuring that, these things are successful? We're missing a huge opportunity. And I honestly think post-pandemic, it's a game changer. Like I do. I think it's a game changer.
Yeah.
Right.
And I remember you mentioned, leaders typically get tasked with achieving specific, hopefully measurable objectives, and that becomes the focus here. That becomes a typical focus. This is the mandate, these are the objectives, these are the goals, this is what I gotta get to in order to be considered as successful. Followership kind of expands that by saying a method of me achieving that objective is going to be by not only showing up as the first person leading, but as me willingly accepting that I also need to be an effective contributor and follower of others who are on that same path. And that there is not only there is nothing wrong with that, but that it is additive to my likelihood of ultimate success.
Yeah.
Right? It is additive to my ultimate success. So the way I understand the model is that every professional, every person who considers themselves a leader also needs to think actively about whom do I lead and then whom do I actually follow, and my success is actually built when these two are well integrated. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think yeah, that's fair. And I would just add a third piece
Yeah.
of when you are in those leadership roles, you need to create an environment where people can actually follow you effectively. So there is that side of,
So there is both. It's a both. It's
right?
how do I
It's
follow
both.
others, and how do I create an environment where others are going to enthusiastically follow me?
Yeah, exactly. Because
Ah,
when you can, as a leader, you can be incredibly influenced by the people who are technically, your team or the people that you are following. Because if you have good people and they have ideas and they challenge you as a leader and they actually make you a better leader because their actions are forcing you to react in a way that makes you
mm,
look at things and actually improve your own, leadership skills, then first of all, that's something that needs to happen. Secondly, if you don't create the environment where people can do that, then you're not going to be creating an environment where you're going to get people that are going to be innovative and have ideas, and right, because they're not going to feel that they can contribute. So
yeah.
I think that's kind of the third piece. So I would look at it in three ways. And to your point about the success factor, when you look at the research of followership, of which there is much, like there's an academic, like I said, there's an academic practice of
Field, right?
followership,
Yeah, yeah.
which is really interesting. And I'll put a plug in here where the third global conference of followership, or maybe it's the fourth, is happening in California in May. So if any of the listeners are super interested, it's a fantastic conference. It's usually small. It's got tons of research. Um, but it's but what's interesting is that what we know is that 75% of executive derailment is due to lack of followership skills, not to lack of leadership skills. And this is where
Oh,
it
how
gets
interesting.
really interesting,
How interesting is that?
right? But you think about it, it makes perfect sense. If you're a CEO and you can't align with your board or your shareholders or your, right, and you can't be influenced by them to be successful, and especially if you have a different, value system, or if you're in a completely different headspace as to where the organization should go, you're not going to last very long. And so that, right, that comes back to the importance of, especially when we get into those senior roles, of knowing yourself and who you are and how you're going to be in alignment with that leadership, because everybody is a follower in some sense,
And
right?
this is
There's
very true.
nobody at the there's very nobody at the very top, like ever, right?
Well,
So
or one could say, at the very top, perhaps is an idea. At the very top is a purpose, right? That's so. But I think you're right. There is not necessarily a human at the top,
yeah,
but like this. I love that you use the example of CEO, because of course, in most organizations, people who work for organizations, they would consider CEO to be the sort of the ultimate top boss leader.
Yeah,
What you're saying is that
they
the
still have
best
people to
ones,
follow.
yes, the best ones truly are leaders, and they are also effective followers, both in format of creating followership of their leadership, but also them being the lead follower of the mandate of the board. That
Yeah.
would be following the mandates of the purpose of the organization or the idea of the organization, right?
Exactly. And in some organizations, that mandate would even go outside the organization, and you have to follow, the public, your customers, your
Sure, of
clients.
course. Yeah, of
Right?
course,
It
of
goes
course.
all the way, right? It goes all the way through. And I think it's interesting when you sort of look at the evolution of an individual's career. When you start in your career, it's mostly about acquiring technical skills. And by technical, I don't necessarily mean technological, but the skills that you need to do your job, right? Or your career. When you are starting out and you don't know a lot, this is what we do. We learn our job. So we have to figure out the processes and the tasks and the tools and all that sort of stuff. And that's usually what takes up sort of the first early years of our career is we're learning how to do the job, right? And there's a little bit maybe of leadership depending on who we are and how we show up in the world. And then there's a little bit of followership because you're basically doing what your manager asks you to do, right? Um, but followership kind of goes beyond that in the theory. It's not about just following somebody's orders. It's about taking responsibility for your own actions and looking at how you are contributing overall to the organization. And what's really interesting, because it feels very counterintuitive, is that the more you evolve in your career and the more you move up the proverbial ladder, the more followership actually becomes important
Hmm.
because because you get into situations where you need to show that you are, we use the language a lot, individual contributor,
Yeah,
but you're an individual contributor to what? So if you're fantastic and super bright and have all these great ideas, but you haven't figured out your followership skills yet, so your leader doesn't listen to you, or your timing is always wrong, or you present them in a way that no one else can understand them, then you're not going to be very successful in that organization. And so the more that we have a voice, the more that this piece actually becomes important.
hmm. Very, very good. Very, very good. We have Rihan submitted a question, and
Fantastic.
it's a great question. He says, in your opinion, and this is, I think we can start with the foundations, right?
Yep.
So, in your opinion, what forms the foundation for followership? Like shared trust, shared vision, shared vision of success. Um,
Yeah.
how would you reflect?
That's a really good question. I think for me, there's a couple of things. I think, yes, to have a shared outcome, people need to know what they're working towards, right? So there's got to be some kind of overarching purpose, vision, call it what you will. But the part, and we often talk about that, right? We're starting to have language around purpose-led organizations and all these great things. But the part that we don't talk a lot about, especially post-pandemic, is the individual accountability to that. It's somehow gotten lost, right? We swung so hard over to looking after people and making sure everybody was okay, which was exactly what we needed to do in that moment. That now it's getting a little tricky to
Yeah, yeah. We stayed
to
stuck there. We stayed stuck
right?
there,
We
right?
stayed stuck there. And so we have a lot of individuals coming into the organization that we actually now, I think, need to teach followership because I think we have people that don't have these skills and they don't necessarily have the mindset either. It's more, and I hear this all the time. I hear, my manager's not looking after me, my manager's not supportive. And I'm always like, well, what are you doing? Like what, right? So yes, you have to have the right conditions of trust and safety and all those great things that we work for. We also need to instill a sense of individual empowerment, not necessarily, but in a very real, practical way of you are responsible for, your own development. Your organization can offer stuff, but you have to show up and learn it, and you might need to take some personal time to do that or whatever. You need to be responsible for your own performance. If it's not going well, you should be the first person, like you should look in the mirror and not at your manager. Right. And I'll give you a perfect example is look at all of our engagement Gallup surveys. Almost all of those questions when we look at employee engagement are about how the organization is engaging the employee. Almost all of them. There's
Actually,
none.
I'm just thinking in my
Yeah.
head the surveys I've been completing, and yeah, actually, there is not a single question about what is it that I am doing,
It,
right?
right? So whereas under the concept of followership, engagement is your responsibility. You can't, it's like an intrinsic motivation engagement.
Yeah,
You can't get it from someone else. They can create a fantastic environment that you're really happy to work in, but at the end of the day, you are the person who decides the mood you're in, who decides how you show up, who decides are you going
yeah.
to be hopeful today, are you going to be engaged? And so we've traditionally looked at engagement completely through an organizational leadership lens of what are we creating for people to, and we have never flipped it and said, what are you doing to keep yourself engaged? And I can't even tell you the number of people that tell me, even senior people that tell me, well, my leader's not engaging me. And it's like, you know what? That's actually your job. Right? And if you're not in the right environment, then hopefully you can find another one. But it's like we have to start
I love
taken
this.
some of these pieces
I
of this
love this.
conversation back. And so I
Oh
don't
my
know if that
God.
answers the question, but I would say, yes, we have to have trust. Yes, we have to have safety. Our leaders have to create environments where people feel like they can show up. But then those individuals have to take that
And
and
show up.
do something with it and show up, right? Yeah, I had a senior leader the other day. This might resonate with some listeners who was doing she was asked to do a lunch and learn for some of the people on her team. We had some people that were recently there. We had some very entry level positions. We had, she had the whole gamut. And they'd been working really hard as an organization to try and be more transparent, to get people, more motivated. They've been sharing things they were doing with their clients and all these things. And in the middle of the lunch and learn, she had a question on the chat, and it was, appreciate all the efforts of the organization to let us know what it's doing. It's nice to have all this transparency. So she thought, great. And then the question was, but what exactly are you doing for my wellness? It's like, what? Eh, right? Because it's in that moment, she
Oh
was
my
like,
God, this is so,
right? She was
yeah.
she was like, how do I answer this in front of all these people? And at the same time, after we were talking about it, because I'm her coach, and I said, that is an amazing moment of inciting followership is if there is a systemic or organizational barrier to you feeling like you can practice wellness, then I need to know about it as your leader. But wellness is an individual thing,
Yeah.
and it's something that is different for everybody. And so, therefore, you are responsible for your own wellness. As a leader, I am responsible for creating the environment that will allow you to practice that.
This is so like you're right. We have gotten ourselves into this empathy that was well called for, and we are stuck now, and it's problem. And what you're saying is so sharply correct. It's it's almost like this is basics. This used to be basic
Yeah.
stuff, right? This used to be
Yeah.
basic stuff.
Yeah. It used to be really basic stuff, but
As in,
between,
take like personal accountability
mm,
is the right? Personal accountability. I love this. Jennifer, I think like there is so much work to be done
Yes. And it's
in
and it's and it's at every level, right? So I'll give you another example. I was working with an organization, really large organization, and um, we'd done a series of leadership trainings for their leaders. And I came back from the followership conference and I said, okay, we're adding a module and we're talking about followership.
uh-huh.
And so presented the information, and it was really fascinating to me and completely normal from a humanity perspective. Of all of the senior leaders in the room looked at me and said, this is amazing. You have to teach this to our teams. And I said, you've just entirely missed the point. Right? Because yes, it has to do, but I'm teaching this to you because
You.
you're all struggling with like your relationships with your CEOs and your VPs and the people that you're trying, right? So it's like at least take a look at this for your own self and your own career, because people automatically go, oh, well, that's for our teams. And yes, it needs to be, but it also needs to be for you, because at the very highest level of leadership, you have got to be a really effective follower in order to be able to, move your stuff forward, but also move the organization's agenda forward. And so it was fascinating to me that that was the very first reaction.
And I just experienced as you're describing your interactions with leaders in organizations that you are working with, how this is applicable at the very top and how this is equally applicable right in the middle and at the open at a more junior levels
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Because if we start training this early, I have an organization that has actually decided to put followership skills in their new employee orientation program.
Wow.
So I'm building them like a module to put in there because they have internal coaching structures and they're having people show up to those conversations and they don't know how to show up. So, right? So the coach is leading the whole thing and that's not the point. So we're trying to give them that sort of baseline beforehand, and it's really interesting because we're getting maybe 30% who just naturally get it and they're like, yeah, yeah, that's great. And thanks for the language, because people don't have the language,
That's
right?
it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And then we have other people who are like, really? That's my responsibility? So it's right. So that end of things is
That borders
fascinating.
entitlement attitude,
Yeah.
right? Bordered entitlement, right?
But we've created entitlement,
Yes,
Dalibor.
yes, we have.
We've created it. So
Yes.
we've created it because we make everything about, our management practices, especially I think with the advent of coaching. I think coaching has a lot to answer for in this particular lens. Is, it's, so how are you doing? And how is the job going? And, what do you want in your career? And we've been doing it with no balance of, and here's what I need
Yeah.
as your manager. Here's
Yeah.
what the expectations are of the organization. Here's where, right? Like it's just completely over vectored. And
Over
so
vector. Yeah.
we've lost the thread. And so I have so many leaders that are struggling with lack of performance, lack of engagement. I had someone the other day who said to me that, they're on a virtual meeting with a client, and their team is, not on camera, nowhere to be seen. Like it's just because it's we've just over vectored
Yeah.
into that
Yeah.
piece. So it's just, and the other thing that I just wanted to add on that is after I started studying followership and kind of got the whole piece, I started realizing that I would say at least 50%, if not like 70% of the executives that I coach, their coaching sessions are actually not about leadership. They're about followership. They're about, how do I engage with my peers? How do I influence this person over there for the greater good? How do I work with my board? How do I, right? Like it's really interesting when you start seeing it through a different lens. It's just really interesting.
You might say that that particular skill of followership in that context, that's the cherry on the top
Mm.
of the cake, right?
Well, and it makes you more successful.
Yeah. So that's
It's
all. That's often is the missing piece.
Yeah, individuals who practice great followership skills have almost like an automatic, immediate 30% better chance of being promoted. It's because leaders feel their support. They feel that, right, they've got alignment. There's a whole piece on that. There's
So can I ask you,
actually, yeah.
I'm going to ask you, so we all have heard about managing up, right? Managing upwards. I would love for you to contrast what, how do you experience someone saying, look, I am really great in managing upwards versus someone who is authentically
Mhm.
great at the leadership skill of followership.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think managing up comes, I think there's definitely overlap, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
definitely
Yeah.
looking at some similar skill sets for sure. I think the concept of managing up is more to your point about doing and saying what you think is necessary to ensure that your leader does, whatever you need them or want them to do. And sometimes
Yeah.
that does not come from an authentic place.
So can we say managing upwards is you taking action to influence your leader to achieve your objective?
Hmm.
Well, followership is willingly following the leader to achieve actually the shared objective.
Yeah. To this, yeah. And your objective will be served by that.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's perfect. And I think also managing up at times we will not say what we think. We will say what we want, we know the leader wants to hear in order to promote our own case. Or sometimes it's just a matter of survival, let's be clear, in some
Mhm.
organizations, right?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
and so when you're in that situation, that will not, that's not followership skills. That's not going to allow the leader to actually, you know, improve the way that they lead because they're just being reinforced.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So yeah, so there's overlap and then there's a definite difference.
Definite difference. Yeah. Yeah.
Definite difference. Yeah. There's I had a slide to share.
Sure. Absolutely. We can feel free.
And then
Um,
it's yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I had we have a number of questions
Okay, well,
from coming
let's
from
do
the
the
audience.
questions first.
All right. So Deborah is asking, um, uh, if we think about the cultivation of these followership skills from the psychometric assessment perspective, uh, are you aware? Is this being considered as part of some future psychometrics models? Are you aware of anything that exists, perhaps to track, measure those set of attributes,
Hmm.
or not yet?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I do believe there's a couple of people out there in the research world working on like a followership assessment kind of
Mhm.
thing. I do think there's something out there that exists. Um, in terms of the larger psychometric assessments world, of which there are thousands, right? Um, I do think it's a gap in a lot of them because we are very focused on leadership and the traits of leadership and those skills. But I do think if you're working with someone, you could probably piece out the aspects of some of those traits. So, for example, if you have psychometric assessments that look at things like, influence and decision making and
Teaming.
teamwork
Yeah.
and right, like I think you could probably pull some of those out. But yeah, I do think that there's something that exists. I'd have to look into that, but I remember somebody saying something about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like this is becoming a, a topic that people are having more and more conversations about.
Yeah.
So, if
Yeah.
not now, fast forward a year, I'm sure somebody's going to come up with something that is going to be,
Exactly. I mean, I think it's essential, and it was really interesting at the conference in Glasgow in April last year at the followership conference. I was talking to a few people who were, um, and granted, a little frustrated because they felt that this was so important and it still wasn't, in our mainstream organizations, largely, I think, because of the language around it, right? I think people
So
don't
is there a
like
way
that.
to find a different word for it? Like
Well, wait, so
I completely get what you're saying, like
yeah,
100%, and I agree.
yeah. So we had a conversation about it, and I think, and it's funny because I've talked to some of my clients about this, and once they understand truly what it is, then they use it, and it doesn't seem to bother them. So I don't know if changing the language is a solution. I think education is always a
Sure.
solution,
But
right?
yeah, but I agree.
Um,
Like we could find a better we could find a better word to get people to actually even pay attention, right? Even
yeah,
pay attention. Because once they pay attention and hear it,
yeah.
those who
Uh,
need to
and I
those who
think
should
that's
click, they will click, right?
exactly. And I think that, you start talking to people about career success and, the one thing they should be, focusing on at every level and just change it a little bit. Um, the conference was created by Mark and Samantha Hurwitz, and they actually wrote a really great book, which is called Leadership is Half the Story. And that's the slide that I wanted to share.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'll just put
Let's
it
go
up
there.
now. So can you see that?
Not yet, but I think it's there we go. Here it is. Yes.
Okay.
There we go. So now
Um,
you can yeah, yeah. You can if I don't know if you can put it in the full screen mode because we are now
um,
seeing the
oh, yeah, you're seeing the whole,
let's
yeah,
let's see.
there is only one slide. Hang on 1 second. Let me do it this way. Let me do it
If
this
not,
way.
then it's fine too. I mean, you were in the presenter's mode, so we could see the slide and the other slide.
Yeah, no, I know. Is that better?
That's better.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So this is from their book, Leadership is Half the Story, which I highly recommend if you're looking at this. Also, there's a really great free podcast called Lead and Follow by Sharna Fabiano, which is available wherever you listen to your podcast. Which she interviews different people and they talk about leadership and followership, and it's pretty cool. Um, but this is the framework. This is to get people to start understanding from like a practical perspective what this could look like, right?
Yeah.
So you've got your 5 key areas of leadership skill on the right. So and you'll see that it's all about like framing. Like I said, whenever I've taught leadership, I've always said that it's about creating an environment, right? You need to create an environment as a leader where you're giving people the tools that they need to do their job. They feel supported and valued, and they feel like they can challenge, right? They feel safe enough to be able to say, hey, I don't agree, or because that's the only way we're going to get the best ideas is, in Canadian organizations, we almost seem to be allergic to productive conflict sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's very
Yeah.
frustrating because
Yeah.
we miss out on all of these things. So you'll see that, we have decision framing, performance coaching, again, ensuring an environment, right? Environment. Um, helping people navigate the organization, keeping your team members informed so then they can actually do the job that they were supposed to do. And especially when things are changing all the time, right? And
Yeah.
if people feel like they're not getting the information and they're just sort of, you know, just getting hit all the time with all these things that they aren't aware that's coming, then you do feel like you have no power and no agency in that. And then again, framing, relationship framing. So how do you create that comfortable, equitable, professional environment for every team member? So you see the whole theme around the leadership
Is the
is
environment
that
actually
is the
creation?
environment. It's
Yeah.
creating
Yeah.
the environment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which really resonated with me because I've taught that in leadership for years now. Um, and then we look at the key areas of followership. And for example, if you can't make the decision, if you don't have that authority, how do you advocate for it? How do you influence? How do you understand the right timing to bring that up? So that it actually makes a contribution to that particular piece. So it's not just saying you don't agree; it's actually thinking strategically about what is the best piece. Taking initiative for your own engagement, as we talked about, right? Your own development, your on-the-job performance, whatever is within your control to do. You need to do it, right? How do you make yourself agile? How do you ensure that regardless of all the twists and turns that your organization and your role might be taking, How do you ensure that you actually can continue to thrive? What does that look like? The dashboard communicating, just like the leader has a responsibility to cascade communication down, the follower has a responsibility to cascade communication up.
Mm,
So keeping your
mm.
leader well informed, stimulating the right kind of leadership action because there's stuff they don't see. So they're making decisions based on what they know, but they could be missing a huge chunk from the front line that they are not aware of. And again, this comes back to the importance of the leader creating an environment where people feel that they can funnel that information up, right? Even if it's not good news. And then the relationship building, understanding how to work with leadership, developing a relationship. A lot of people say to me, my leader, doesn't sit down with me or my manager. And my first question always is, okay, so what have you done
Yeah.
to move that relationship forward? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is, well, nothing, because that's not, that's not on me. They're the leader. They should be. And it's like, no, no, no. Right. So it's just this is a really great frame. As I said, it's in the book. I highly recommend it. It's a great read. And it just walks you through the different pieces of what that looks like.
This is gold,
Yeah,
Jennifer. Thank you for sharing. Thank you
you're
for
very
sharing this.
welcome.
So, um, what would be the great action for people who are, let's say, listening to this program and they're saying, you know what, I actually I like what I'm hearing. There's something there. What would you suggest should be concrete steps people can be taking here?
I think first of all, every time you are looking at a situation and you hear yourself complaining or ranting or venting, and possibly very justified, about something the organization has done or that your boss has done or that you're right. If everyone had the immediate reflex to sort of turn the mirror and just be like, okay, what is my role in this? What can I do? What can I control? Is there a conversation I need to have that I didn't have that I need to have differently than right? The question I asked one of my clients last week was, so is this a you problem or is this a they problem? Because our perception and we often run with the idea that something is a certain way, and we haven't done the due diligence to find out if that is really the truth or if that is how we are interpreting it through our own bias and our own perception and our own experience, or we're surrounded by people who are telling us a certain story, and it's easy to believe because then we don't have to take any responsibility for it. So I think from an individual space, if we all started being more responsible for
So
what we put
mirror
out.
in the front, step one.
Yeah, mirroring the front step one. I just think if we were more responsible, especially about what we're putting out into the world, um, it would be nice to have people who don't be hide behind screens and make comments and right and then don't own them. Like it's very frustrating for everyone, I think. So
Yeah.
definitely be looking in the mirror. Um, if you are a leader, and to your point, thinking about those three pieces. How am I following? How am I engaging with my peers in a followership way so that we can actually create collaborative leadership, right? You think about every single venue in life, right? We have, corporate environments, non-for-profit, we've got government, we've got politics, if you think that at some point somebody would have said, you know what, that's a great idea. I'm going to follow you. I'm going to support you. I'm going to do everything I can to make it happen. As opposed to say, you know what, yeah, it's a great idea, but it's not ours. So we're not going to support it.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's getting into that whole sort of nonpartisan mindset of, hey, we're all in this together kind of thing. So I think as a leader, you've got those three areas. You've got how am I following? How am I being a supportive peer and following? And where are my opportunities to deliberately step into leadership and then deliberately step into followership? Because, right, that needs to be intentional as well.
Amongst my peer
Um,
group.
Yeah, amongst the
Yeah,
peer group.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And then as a leader, what are you doing to create an environment where people can be active, effective followers?
of
If
you. Of
somebody challenges you, how do you react? If somebody comes up and wants to advocate for a certain decision or wants to communicate a piece of information, what is the environment that you are creating? Do you encourage people that look at their own self-development, or do you tell them that there's just no space or time for that right now because right? Like you have to really look at your behavior as a leader.
yeah,
Um, and then step number three, I think we need to start teaching followership at every single level and help people understand what impact that's going to have on your success in any kind of organization and what that looks like. And for me, that starts at like post-secondary, high school, like right? Like yeah, I often say that if I could do a really big project in my life, I'd like to revamp the educational system. But it's because we teach people that
yeah,
it doesn't matter. We teach people that if you're late for assignments, it's okay because you were having a bad day. And so when
yeah,
they go to work
yeah,
and they're late with an assignment, they don't understand why the
yeah.
person's not happy. Like we teach
You're
them
right.
this behavior.
Yes.
So we have to start going a different way. And so I'll give you a great example. I was on a because I do work in neurodiversity as well, which and I was on a panel in the legal profession, and we were talking about the uptick of the amount of individuals who are registering with the accommodations office at university in law school because of a variety of different neurodivergent conditions that they have that are going to impact the way that they study. And so, we had like Penn State and like we had some really big law schools. And so they were talking about all these things they're doing to support their students. And I said, well, that's fantastic. I said, but is there a part in there before they leave law school where you're teaching them how to advocate for those adjustments on their own when they start working for a law firm? Because the law firms aren't going to be
Yeah.
throwing out that red carpet and saying, you know what, it's okay, take your time. The client doesn't, it's right. It's just so as opposed to just letting them go to these organizations and it being used to one environment and having a very different one
Yeah.
and probably struggling,
Oh, yeah.
we could
Absolutely.
actually be actively teaching them how do you have those conversations professionally? How do you advocate for yourself in a way that you can show that it's actually also going to be a contribution to the organization? How, like, there's a way of framing those conversations that we are not teaching at an early enough age,
And how to do this by taking personal accountability.
right? Because then it's a much better conversation.
It is so important, and I think that it's been years since personal accountability was high on the agenda. I
Yeah.
think I know it's coming back, and I think it's deeply needed. And I would say I agree with you 100% that educational system that we currently have and we have had in the last I don't know how many years has been producing this expectation that is detached from how the world actually works. We need to
Yeah.
close this
Yeah.
gap. We need to
Yeah.
close this gap. Actually, this is what needs to occur. Ideally, this is what needs to occur. But I love what you're saying about both the need to change and improve educational system and to re-emphasize the importance of my wellness is in my hands. My wellness is not in the hands of my employer.
Exactly. And so for that, you have to know yourself,
Of course,
right? And
know
what makes you
thyself.
tick. And so,
Yeah,
and again, when you look at sort of how we train people and how we prepare them for the world ahead, there's a lot of people who take MBA programs, for example, who haven't had a lot of work experience. They're doing it because they have been told that it's going to get them into the organization at a higher level, right? Um, and then what do we do in these MBA programs and in most of our programs actually that are anything to do with business is we teach people how to lead,
yeah,
but we don't ever teach them how to follow. And we're teaching individuals how to lead when they actually haven't figured out yet who they are.
yes,
Right?
yes,
And
yes.
sometimes that takes a really long time. It's an evolution, right? It's an evolutive process. So if your lack of self-awareness is not high and we're teaching you that you are the person who's going to be the leader, eh, then we wonder why we end up with these individuals who, are just creating these, really
Yeah.
challenging
Oh yeah.
environments for
Oh
their
yeah.
teams.
Absolutely.
And
Oh,
it's really easy to see how we got there. So now we have to kind of unravel, I think, and go
yeah.
back to the basics a little bit.
Yeah. Go back to the basics a little bit.
Yeah.
Jennifer, this was fantastic. This was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Obviously, I learned a lot. I learn a lot every time I speak with you. So thank you for that, and thank you for the audience who've been following this. Thanks for the questions. So tomorrow, I'm going to be having another wonderful guest, Marina Bejanova, who is the founder of the Brand of the Leader. We're going to talk about the importance of leadership branding, personal branding. So I will invite you all to come back tomorrow, Wednesday, January 29th, for that session. Um, and Jennifer, of course, if anyone is interested to learn more, now people know who you are and where to find you. Obviously, you are on LinkedIn, but if anybody wishes to contact me, I'll be happy to pass on your contact information.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
any closing thoughts, Jennifer?
I have been recently working with some clients in teaching leadership and followership simultaneously at the same time in the same room with three different levels. And there are the bumps in the road that you could anticipate,
Mm-hmm.
but it's been really interesting. So I think encouraging your organizations and yourself to look at how we deliver these programs differently and where the potential might be to mix it up, because the ripple effect of that has been incredible in terms of team environment and collaborative levels and understanding people as people, and just the connection that has been created has been really interesting. So I would encourage everyone to just look at sort of what they're doing around leadership. Where could we add a piece of this in, right? You don't have to go all out right at once because
Yeah.
people won't follow you when you do that, right? But just what are the incremental changes when you look at your organization? What are the behaviors that you are encouraging, as a leader, as an organization, and where could you possibly be putting some of these key pieces to help people? I think that would be something that would be amazing to
Fantastic.
see. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jennifer. And Marlene, I just asked a question about that podcast that you mentioned. Can you just repeat that podcast again that you mentioned is a great
Yes.
source?
It's called Lead and Follow, and it's by Sharna Fabiano.
Sharna
Um,
Fabiano.
Sharna
And
Fabiano. And Sharna Fabiano's background was actually in dance. So she has a very interesting perspective of followership, because when you think
nice.
about it from a dance perspective, if you are right in that relationship, you have to lead and you have to follow it, right? Like it's really interesting. Yeah. So it's a great podcast.
And that's a great parable too. It is.
Yeah.
This is actually is about dance. It is.
Yeah.
It is a
I
dance.
always
It's
say
just.
leadership is a dance. It's a
It's a
dance.
dance.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Jennifer, we'll end it on that high note that leadership actually is a beautiful dance. So thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and have yourself a wonderful Tuesday.
You
Thank you.
too. Thanks for having me.
Bye bye.
Bye.